Hey, it's Nikki. Burlington Buzz covers the everyday life of our town, the people, the places, the things that make Burlington, Burlington. We don't usually talk about national politics, but the 6th Congressional District seat is open this year, and we thought you deserved a chance to hear directly from the people asking for your vote. This is one of a collection of conversations with the candidates running to represent Burlington in Congress. We hope you'll take the time to listen to all 7 conversations. Check the show notes for links to connect with each candidate directly. Now let's get to it. Hello, it's Burlington Buzz on the mic again, and I am Nikki. I'm here with John Beccia. He is running in the Democratic primary for the 6th Congressional District here in Massachusetts. John, welcome. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Nikki.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. All right, so just to get listeners oriented to sort of who you are, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so great. I grew up in Milford, Massachusetts, so I've been in Massachusetts all my life. Been in the district here over 20 years, but I grew up basically in a working class family. My grandparents came from Italy in pursuit of the American dream like everyone else, and put myself through law school at night, working in insurance during the day. Nothing more humbling than that, trying to sell insurance.
Oh, man.
And then built a career in financial services. So I've been in the private sector most of my career, working as a lawyer, compliance professional. I've worked for banks. I worked for fintechs, basically working for consumer protection, fighting fraud, protecting the financial system. And then I started my own business. So I know kind of like what it's like to make payroll, create jobs. I started a consulting firm back in 2018 and built that up to over 60 people. And, I've just been trying to think about, how do we do better within the financial services system. But now I'm looking at public service and government. And why I'm in this race is because I feel like everything is broken. Our government is not working for us. And certainly as a Democrat, very frustrated with the Trump administration. Something new every day, whether it's rogue agency and ICE, whether it's a foreign policy that just is misguided, or the economy that just never gets better. And then you have career politicians. We keep sending the same people to Washington and the status quo, and it just doesn't, there's so much corruption, and we need to reform the system, number one, but we got to start helping working families. So that's my real thing is, I've been fortunate in my life. I've lived the American dream, but we need to give people opportunity. There's no more middle class. There's, the high end, and there's folks that are really struggling. And I'm spending my time visiting the cities and towns, 39 cities and towns in this district,
wow,
including Burlington,
yeah,
and learning that, young people are leaving the state because they can't afford here. Old people can't find housing. They're stuck in their homes. Can't get access, making difficult decisions between groceries and gas and all these things. And the government, meanwhile, the government is not focused on these issues. So my agenda is really simple. It's starts with the economy, then building out education and healthcare. And, I'll give you one more example.
Okay.
On education, can't get into a vocational school here. And there's a lottery system, and we need to create different pathways for people to have opportunity. And that's what I'm all about.
Let's talk first about you. You donated your campaign a little bit of money. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what it says about access for candidates?
Yeah, I think we have 6 people in this race, but I think, frankly, we have more, if not for the campaign finances. I think we need to reform the system. We need to overturn Citizens United. We need to get back to, there's too much, like I said, corruption in politics, or people answering to donors, answering to kind of the special interest. And so to me, one of my big things is reforming the campaign finance system and setting term limits and, banning stock trading, things like that. But in terms of myself, I'm betting on myself here. Again, I am so appreciative of everything I had and everything, had coming up and from a working class family, and then, really being able to achieve some level of success. And I want people to have the same opportunities. And that's why I'm excited. And that's why I'm betting on myself and putting in my own resources to run in this race, number one. And two, I'm not beholden to anyone, right? I'm beholden to myself and the voters, right? Frankly, this is all going to come down to, it's not based on how much money you have. It's based on what the voters want. And I think they want someone like myself with outsider, with experience, get stuff done. People always want to label you too, within the party. And I consider myself a common sense, pragmatist, get stuff done Democrat. And that's what we need right now.
So speaking of the sort of national landscape versus the local landscape. So I usually say this off air, but I'll say it now. Burlington Buzz is a local civic news organization. We do civic engagement. We do community engagement. We do not use the P word at all, the P word being politics. We don't talk about national politics. So this is relatively new territory for us. But we do think it's important to introduce the candidates to the people who are going to be voting for the candidates. So all that to say, the conversations that are happening in Washington don't seem to be matching the realities and the pinch points that are happening locally within towns and cities. What do you think is one issue that Washington is overlooking? Just one.
Oh, okay.
Just pick one.
There is a lot. Well, I would just preface this by saying the federal government doesn't need to balance their budget, but state and locals do. And right now we have a national debt where we're paying $88 billion a month in interest payments alone.
Wow.
And the federal government does have the money. We've seen it with bipartisan legislation across the way on different issues when we need it, like during COVID and things like that. But all these cities and towns, including Burlington, are really facing issues that are because we're dismantling these agencies and dismantling things like the Department of Education. But the probably lowest hanging fruit one for me is food insecurity.
Okay.
40% of families in Massachusetts suffer from food insecurity.
Wow.
I go to the food pantries, whether it's the Open Door in Gloucester or Beverly Bootstraps or Salem Food Pantry, and it's an issue we should be able to address. And we should be meanwhile, the president is bragging that he cut SNAP benefits. So we're going to see a big impact from the big, beautiful bill is really going to have a negative impact on Mass Health and SNAP. And that's one area, that's day one for me, fighting back on that, along with the rest of the list. But you asked me for one, so that's it.
Yeah. Well, so now we're going to talk actually about sort of inflation, right? Mm-hmm. It's no secret that things are more expensive now than they were 2 years ago. Childcare is more expensive. Groceries are more expensive. Gas is more expensive, although maybe a little bit of a different issue. But what can Congress do? What would you do and support as a member of Congress to help alleviate that pressure from folks? And how would somebody on the ground here in Burlington feel that?
Yeah, everything is really difficult. And, like I said, young people leaving the state in record numbers. You can't afford to live here, right? And that, tariffs, again, $1,700 per year for a family for the tariffs and things like that. There's a lot we can do at the federal level. And one is reflective in the taxes. So we need to make sure we need to reform our tax code to make sure that corporations are rich or paying their fair share. That will help fund additional programs. And then we got to provide tax credits for those who need it. I'm a big proponent of look at one of the biggest costs for working families is childcare and preschool. And so, whether it's a universal pre-K or some kind of childcare tax benefit, that's important. Same thing around housing. We are just keep building single family homes. We don't have housing for lower income folks. We don't have housing for elderly. Many older people are stuck in their homes. Veterans, we need to build different types of housing. We need to build in around our communities and improve our infrastructure. So I think that's a big issue too, where at the federal level, we can, and we do actually just pass some bipartisan legislation in housing that's being torpedoed, unfortunately, by the president. But this is an issue, again, this shouldn't be an issue whether it's Democrats versus Republicans. This is an issue everybody at the end of the day cares about these things at the local level. And here in Burlington, again, you care about being able to have the job and able to live in a house and get access to education and healthcare. And those are the things that I want to focus on from a federal level.
Yeah, I think in Burlington, housing is always an issue. We keep talking about housing is there's low inventory. You already mentioned the housing life cycle where seniors can't afford to downsize, so they're living in their big single-family homes, and that doesn't open up a home then for a young family who is ready to move into that home, and then it creates this pricing, issues as well, and there's just, they say there's not enough inventory. Try to build multifamily, and then there's problems with building multifamily because of density and traffic and all that stuff. What are some specific things that can be done to support housing? And you've already mentioned a few of them, but let's dig in a little bit deeper.
Yeah, there's a lot, and some of it's federal, some of it's local. But I mean, some of the zoning requirements are difficult, and then we need to kind of create a higher floor there. We need to make sure that we're lowering the cost of building. Again, I mentioned the tariffs, but the cost of building these complexes is very high, even single-family homes. We got to get more creative around the housing supply. Like I said, we need to look at mixed use housing, which will also bring in businesses. We need to look at auxiliary dwelling units. We need to look at repurposing existing structures to make sure that we have an adequate supply. And then we got to figure out this transportation issue, because we have, a lack of connectivity, especially within the North Shore. Burlington, as we know, is difficult sometimes to get in and out of.
Yeah, traffic's always a thing.
And also creating more of helping our business community as well. It's small business. 80% of the business on the North Shore is small business, so we have to help them give them capital to build their businesses, help alleviate some of the costs. Healthcare costs are killing them, and then continue to bring in innovative businesses, because that's going to bring jobs, bring corporate tax revenue, and help win this issue around housing as well.
Yeah, I like the economy really is just this kind of cycle of like people being able to be in a community, they can contribute to the economy. That brings, that bolsters businesses. Transportation also helps that, it is a big like virtuous cycle. Yeah,
it is. And it has to be done in a holistic manner. I think one of the problems is we try to just keep putting Band-Aids on it, or looking at it as a silo, and, say we can deal with this one issue, but it's really a holistic way of like, we need to revitalize the economy. So my approach is to, really look at these things holistically and talk about, increasing minimum wage, increasing SBA lending for small business, helping with the transportation renovations and things like that, and building out our infrastructure. So it has to be, like I said, multi-pronged. It can't just be, one or two things, because we won't get us where we need to go.
Yeah. And it has to be, I feel like, people need to be talking about it, right?
Yeah.
People need to agree.
You got to prioritize. You can't get stuff done if you don't have a goal or you don't prioritize it. That's the problem, right? In D.C., what's happening right now is we're all focused on the wrong things, certainly with the Trump administration, right? Some of these senseless wars, or some of the other, the SAVE Act and this voting bill, which is derailing our housing legislation. Again, we should be focusing on the kitchen table issues and prioritizing that, and then figuring out a way, all right, how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to allow people, like I said, to have those opportunities that they need to have?
Yeah, and it requires a level of long-range planning. Mm-hmm. I'm going to end my sentence there.
Yeah, and a long range, yes, and also working together and building coalitions, and that's what I've done in the private sector. People tell me, well, we can't work with the Republicans. Yes, we can, and we got to find common ground. Mm-hmm. There's a time to fight. We need to fight to protect our democracy. Certainly right now, I am as outraged as anyone in terms of what the Trump administration is doing, whether it's with our free and fair elections, whether it's voting rights, whether it's the wars, whether it's ICE, which I know we'll probably talk about because we're here in Burlington. Yeah. But I think it's, we need to, again, fight on those issues that are damage democracy. And as a father of 2 high school children, I'm worried about their future. But then also, we're not going to get anything done if we don't focus on the things that we talked about.
Yeah. And so, speaking about the economy, AI it feels to a lot of people like a threat to the economy right now. It feels like it's going to be usurping jobs that people rely on for their income. And they're, a lot of people are like not sure what they will do if their job is replaced by AI. Can talk about what kinds of policies you would support to help us adapt to this AI landscape that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, there was a recent Tufts University study that said Massachusetts is at the highest risk of job displacement because of AI. So that's not
comforting news,
enviable place to be. But again, technology cuts both ways. There's good things about it, and it can help our lives and can create jobs, but there's also risks. And I spent my career in dealing with risks and regulation in financial services and understanding, and I got involved in things like cryptocurrency. And when I first came, I came from the banking space and was thrown into it and was like, how do we make sure this is safe, or make sure that there's regulation to protect consumers, to make sure there's no fraud in the system and scams. And that's going to be the same thing here with AI, because, and I also teach regulation at Boston University School of Law. And I tell my students, how do you regulate something? Well, you have to understand the activities and the risks. And many people in Congress, don't even know like what AI does. And frankly, it's moving very fast.
Exactly. I was going to say it's developing faster than our ability to understand it anyway. And once we think we understand it, then something new happens and you're like, wait a minute.
But the biggest risks around job displacement are around the data centers some of the concerns around electricity, around environment. There's concerns around social media, the impact on kids specifically. And I think those are areas we need to regulate. And it can't just be a one-off, too. We need to make sure that I'm for creating Office of Innovation at the federal level, having certification programs, having ongoing guardrails around these things, and making sure, and then also making sure that we don't have negative impacts on the environment as well as cost. We don't want, for example, data centers. We don't want taxpayers bearing the cost for that usage and things like that. And so, AI, I use the term responsible innovation, and that's what we need to focus on when it comes to things like AI. We need to be very thoughtful and careful about it, and making sure that we're looking at it on an ongoing basis, because the technology is always going to move faster than regulation, legislation, and so right now it's a very concerning and something that we should be focused on.
Yeah, and since we're in Burlington, and since you mentioned cryptocurrency, we just passed a cryptocurrency ATM ban here in Burlington. Town meeting did. There's not anything at the federal level, which is why we had to do it here at the local level. Would you support some kind of regulation or ban at the federal level for cryptocurrency ATM specifically?
Well, ATMs are regulated as what's called a money services business, money transmitter. And so they're required to have certain programs and required to be registered with FinCEN. And in certain states, they have to actually get state licenses. I think we need to look at the risks and the use cases. I also don't see the use cases for crypto ATMs. I don't see a big demand for that right now.
Yeah, that's what our lieutenant was telling me. It's just like the fines or the fees are so usurious that it really doesn't make sense to use a crypto ATM for legitimate purposes.
Yeah. And so you need really, again, I'm someone who's spent a lot of time on anti-money laundering regulation and compliance, building out compliance programs that basically monitor transactions, and we report suspicious activity to the government and work with law enforcement to find bad actors. And that's why you want all these things to be regulated. You want things to be in the financial system so you can detect bad activity and work with law enforcement, make sure those folks are out of this. The same with banking. That's banks. You see these big fines against the largest banks in the U.S. because it's hard to monitor this activity. It's really making sure that you're ahead of it, and you can never eliminate the risk, and but you mitigate it as much as you can.
Great. All right. Well, we have one more question until our time has kind of come to an end here, but it's about immigration and the Immigration and Customs Enforcement facility that we have here in Burlington. It is a processing facility, or that's in name at least, and a lot of people have a lot of big thoughts about it from both directions. What are your thoughts on specifically this facility and what Congress's job is versus local and state authority to address questions, concerns about facilities like this?
Yeah, well, I'm as a lawyer, I'm concerned about the rule of law and protecting the rights of all citizens, and that's not happening right now. And we're certainly, when you look at immigration and what's going on with ICE, is outrageous and appalling. And I'm for abolishing ICE certainly in its current form, and making sure we're seeing people getting ripped away from their families who are members of this community. These aren't criminals, and the detention center here was never meant to be for human detainment or things like that. And they're looking to build other detention centers, like a big one in New Hampshire and other areas. And again, I don't think that's the right approach. We need to make sure that people, again, I mentioned earlier, my grandparents came from Italy. We have immigrants who came to this country and built a life here. And the folks that live in our communities are members and have families here and are working in the community. And we need to support the people who are doing the right thing, playing by the rules, and want to be part of, so I was excited to see the Supreme Court ruling on birthright citizenship. I think this is still the land of opportunity. We need to make sure there's a pathway for citizenship, but we also need to make sure that we are protecting the rights of individuals. Certainly, if we have people who are criminals or if there's other issues, they should be prosecuted, and there are laws around that, and we need to go through the proper process. But right now, that's just not happening. Things are done so arbitrary. I used the term rogue earlier, but I think we need to really get back to a sensible approach on immigration. And so, we don't get to this level where people are afraid to walk their kids to school, or not, are detained, and we don't even know when they're coming back, if they're coming back, and that's not the America that I want to live in.
Yeah. So what is your sensible approach if you were elected, and just say more about what that would look like.
Yeah, I think obviously we need border security. Obviously we need like I said, pathway for citizenship, but we also need to make sure that we're reforming the system we have now, whether it's the asylum system, whether it's the visas, making sure that people who are here are protected, their rights are protected in terms of making sure that they're able to work here fairly, able to vote here, able to live here. And so making sure that the rule of law is followed in terms of how folks are treated if they're, if they're detained, and making sure there's a process around that. And so it's more making sure that we have a more legal process like we've always had in this country, and getting away from the arbitrary way that ICE is facilitating this, and the detention centers, and getting more to a more practical way. We did have bipartisan legislation on immigration, and again, we know who torpedoed that. He's currently in the White House. But I think we need to get back to, looking at these issues in a way that, again, America is the land of opportunity. It is, people want to come here. We should allow that, but we also need to have the same protections, and we want our community safe, and we want our borders secure. And but there's a way to do both, and there's a way to do one that's both humane, sensible, and practical. And that's what we need to get back to.
Great. John Beccia, thank you so much for joining us today. Listeners, stay tuned for more interviews with Congressional 6th District candidates. John, thank you for being here and for sharing a little bit about your story.
You betcha. Thanks so much.
Thanks to John Beccia for that lively interview. In all the excitement, I forgot to ask him for his website address. So here it is now. It is becciaforcongress.com. It's BECCIA for Congress.com. And that's it for this episode of Burlington Buzz on the Mic. I hope you'll take the time to listen to all 7 of our 6th District interviews. The Massachusetts primary is on September 1st, with early voting taking place August 22nd through August 28th, and the general election is on November 3rd. Anybody who is registered Democrat or unenrolled can vote in the Democratic primary, and anybody who is registered Republican or unenrolled can vote in the Republican primary. Check the Burlington Town Clerk's website, linked in the show notes, for details on how, when, and where you can vote.